right, today, as we mentioned before, we have a Sean Palmer, Certified Business Advisor for the Washington Small Business Development Center. And Sean, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Christina. Appreciate you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sean Palmer. I am an accredited small business consultant as well as a Washington Small Business Development Center Certified Business Advisor. In short, I know some stuff about some stuff, but I don't know everything. To which you might say, Sean, how can that be? You are a charming, bright guy. Well, you're half right. I appreciate that. Between One Eastside Spark and the network of advisors that the WSBDC has throughout Washington State, there's not a resource that we can't put our hands on for you. So if there's something that you need help with, tax questions, human resource questions, exporting questions, that is something that we will happily help you with. So please feel free to reach out and take advantage of some of our no-cost advising. And I want to raise that this is no cost, funded on the WSBD side, SBDC side by the Small Business Administration. This is provided because the SBA knows that the success of our economy and the success of our communities is rooted in the success of our small businesses. That is why we provide this. This is going to be a fun presentation because it is inspired by mayonnaise, and not just mayonnaise, but 6 jars of mayonnaise. I was a middle schooler. It's the 80s. I'm an only child, so it's me, my mom, my dad. We live in a Rambler and have what barely qualifies as a walk-in pantry. And I remember asking my mom one day, why do we have 6 jars of Best Foods mayonnaise? And she said, I got them on sale. Now, I often went shopping with my mom, so I knew she didn't just stock up all in one trip. These are things that she was purchasing one at a time and accumulating. So I said to myself, okay, if you can buy something less expensively now and you know you are going to use it later, that makes sense. Thanks, Mom. That's everything I need to know about inventory control for sandwiches. Now, getting into the meat and potatoes of today, typically, I would start off with something a little bit humorous if I happen to know my audience a little bit. And a standard go-to is, good morning, everybody. I'm sure you came expecting a handsome and charismatic speaker, but Brad Pitt couldn't be here, so you got me instead. And then I began to think, what if Brad Pitt is at an award show and he says, you probably anticipated a well-polished, well-spoken acceptance speech, but Sean Palmer couldn't be here, so you got me. But at some point, he says, hey, buddy, Angelina sends her best. Wish you could be here. If you've heard this joke more than once, I'm working on new material. All right. If you are involved in the sale of a product or service, there are some different ways that you can have control or less control of the actual thing that you are helping to sell. So if you are brokering, let's say an auto broker, I'm trying to track down a late model Ford F-250 black with winch and roll bars and those really fun off-road lights with the smiley face covers. And he says, yes, I can track that down for you. He finds a seller to match with me, the buyer, but he never takes control or never takes custody of the actual vehicle. Now, as opposed to, I go to a dealership, they don't have the inventory that I want. I'm able to order it directly from the factory. The factory ships it to me. I used Ford assets, a Ford dealership to buy a Ford product. The dealership never takes control of it, but they drop ship it to me directly from the manufacturer. Now, just-in-time inventory control is having your inventory delivered exactly when you need it. Now, this is not going to work for a lot of different industries and businesses, but works ideally for some. Let's say you're a contractor and you're framing houses. And you can have a flatbed pull up, drop off all the 2x4s, all the fasteners you need to frame the house that you're going to work on today. That is a heck of a lot more cost effective than having your personnel, your employees, load it up day of, after receiving it from the lumber yard in mass and you having to store it, it gets dropped off just in time. Now, what makes that not work is if you don't have a reliable vendor that's going to be able to keep pace with this, because if they miss one and your crew can't frame the house that day, that is a lot of missed opportunity. If you're not involved in that, it is everybody else. And we have different levels of inventory control based on the type of industry we're in, the type of business that we're running, and things like capacity and consumer demand, price fluctuations, seasonality. So let's break those things down and learn about the variables that affect our inventory control as a business. So why carry inventory? First is cost effectiveness. We learned about this with the mayonnaise. So cost effectiveness is not the same as least expensive. Those two things are entirely different, because cost effectiveness incorporates all the different costs that go into both your business as well as your inventory control and inventory management. Things like scarcity. You might be stockpiling a raw material or a resource or a special ingredient because you're not sure if it's going to be available in 6 months or a year, because enough of it just may not exist. When it comes to collectibles, I have read different articles saying that up to 20% of all autographed collectibles aren't in a private collection, but are sitting in a hermetically sealed plastic box in a warehouse somewhere, simply because a couple of different companies are trying to corner the market on the collectibles industry. In 2011, Fender, I'm pretty sure it was Fender, launched a series, a very limited series of Eric Clapton signed guitars. They made a replica 1965 Les Paul. Nope, it was Gibson. So sorry. They made a replica of the 1965 Les Paul. They made 55 of them. Eric Clapton signed each. He kept the first 5, which means 50 were sold, but only 31, give or take, are currently accounted for in a private collection. They think that up to 40% of those guitars are actually sitting in a warehouse somewhere. And that's all about scarcity and trying to create more, which is going to make your resource or your product even more valuable. Having an unreliable source or supply chain, and how many examples do we have about this right now? And then finally, it can be an actual selling strategy. And we saw this with Blockbuster Video when they launched in 1985. You would go to the mom and pop video store looking for your copy of Terminator 2, and both copies that they had happened to be out. But Blockbuster has 110 copies. We guarantee it's in stock. Come on down and rent from us. So having inventory can actually be used as a selling strategy. Now, if you carry inventory, it means you store your inventory. And there are some different things that affect your ability to manage this effectively. And we're going to lead off with capacity. This is how much actual room you have. It might be in a warehouse. It might be in a closet. I have a client and his business is buying 100 pairs of Nike shoes when there's a new release, storing them in his apartment closet, and then selling them at a premium later. So he is limited in his storage capacity. And sometimes that really works against him, because if he buys an unpopular release and he's sitting on 50 pair, when he wants to buy his next 100, something has to happen. Something has to give, because he doesn't have capacity to store those extra shoes. So he most often winds up liquidating them, sometimes for less than what he originally paid. However, and we're going to get to this here in a couple of slides, being able to turn that over, he is actually saving himself by getting rid of the old inventory to allow new inventory to come in. That turnover is a good thing. We look at our efficiency. If you've got a warehouse, It might mean conveyor belts, forklifts, massive shelving, barcode scanners. You might have a salon where quite literally behind a curtain, you've got a couple shelves and that's where you store your inventory. But how do you keep track of it? The more that you store and the more different things that you store, you're going to have to put more effort. And usually that also equates to more cost into some sort of software or ability to track when new stuff is coming in, how much has gone out, and how efficient we're being with it. And then there's opportunity cost. If we've got shelf space storing these 5 products, it means that shelf space can't be used for anything else. In the 1980s, I didn't want to have that much mayonnaise in our pantry. I much rather would have had some Hot Pockets and Cool Ranch Doritos. So that opportunity cost meant that we couldn't have things on the shelf because it was being occupied by the 6 jars of mayonnaise. Durability, how long is this going to last? If you walk into your local grocer and it just happens to be that everything on your shopping list is 50% off, one of 2 things is going to happen. We're either going to buy twice as much for the same budget, or we're going to spend half as much buying the stuff that we need. Now, if it's more of a durable good, like canned tuna, we can buy twice as much, but we're not going to buy twice as many bananas and twice as many avocados. So we have to be able to measure and weigh how long the shelf life is, which has a lot more to do with spoilage or expiring. Sometimes, especially in retail, when you're working with different vendors, they can change the packaging. And some customers don't want the old packaging. It's the exact same product inside. The logo is new, the verbiage is new, maybe the color on the bottle or the boxes is different, and they don't want to buy the old stuff. So that also impacts durability. And durability is closely connected to obsolescence. If you are a technology company, you're selling components that go into computers, graphics cards and motherboards. Durable, they will last on the shelves for a long time, but they'll be obsolete in 9 months. So you have to be very careful about how quickly this inventory can turn over. There is a local business right here in Redmond who a couple years ago had the opportunity to buy at a great discount fidget spinners en masse, like 1,000 fidget spinners that they could then sell. So here we're looking at the not even seasonality, but the fact that there's this fad and someone else, this wholesaler, was trying to liquidate this inventory. And should this entrepreneur buy that in an effort to turn around and then sell it and trade a profit? We didn't, and we both agreed that that was probably the better way to go. And then finally, carrying costs. So you have the actual cost of maybe your warehouse space, or however much the square footage of your small storeroom is. But do you have to add security? Do you have to add insurance, overhead for keeping the lights on in your warehouse? If it's half full or 99% full, what are the extra costs associated with more than just the product that's on the shelf? Now let's look at ordering. So not the cost of the product, but the actual cost of ordering. If you've got an employee that spends 15 minutes before and after lunch each day updating your weekly order, is that more or less efficient than them spending 45 minutes once a week covering the exact same order? How frequently are you ordering and receiving shipments? If you are in a downtown building that you've got retail on floors 1 through 3, space is at an absolute premium. Your storage area may not be on the same floor as your retail space. So the way you handle the back and forth of getting it from the loading dock to where you store it, and then finally when you need to move it up to the floor space to put it on the shelves, all of that has to be managed. And then finally, turnover. How long are things staying in our inventory before we are able to sell them. And there's a couple of key ratios I'm going to share at the end that we need to be able to target, and each entrepreneur should know. And your accountant, your tax preparer, your CPA, they can help with these things. They show up on your income statement, they show up on your balance sheet. You should know these ratios so that you can better manage your inventory and the rest of your business. But germane to today's topic. All right, now let's look at per unit cost and margin. The predictability of price. So we have a strategic oil reserve in this country because we are greatly dependent on foreign oil. In the event that we go to war, we need to have this stockpile because everything from tanks to the new F-35 fighter, everything runs on a fuel that is derived from crude oil. So that's why we have a strategic oil reserve. The predictability of both the source and supply chain as well as the price. We have to be able to cover ourselves in the event of any wartime situation. And so that's why we have that. Seasonality. Let's look at tires. Places like Les Schwab will see a slight uptick in the summer as people buy new tires because that's the driving season. But month over month, quarter after quarter, things tend to be pretty steady as far as tire sales. Now, the supply chain being interrupted for new cars, that's different. That affects tire sales because now people are trying to get more miles out of the car they currently have because buying a new car is much more challenging. So we've actually seen an uptick in tire sales in the last year. But just looking at the predictability of tire sales, pretty standard. But when you add in ancillary products such as snow tires or chains, there is an absolute seasonality to that. And that is almost directly tied to disposition or liquidation. And we see those on November 1st, especially February 15th. Midnight or approaching midnight on December 24th, as Halloween candy, Valentine's Day candy, and Christmas trees, there's not going to be demand the following day. So not only must we price into our product all the different costs that go into it so that we can recoup that and still be profitable, but understand that if we don't sell out and demand drops off the very next day, what is the liquidation value of our inventory and what can we get out of it so that we can get the next seasonal retail product into that shelf space. And then finally, our purchase method. And this does equate directly to a relationship between cash flow and inventory. Are you buying inventory on credit and then letting it sit? That is, are you paying interest on having product that's not moving that you don't need yet, where you can stop ordering for a couple of months, free up some of that cash flow and save money on interest, as well as being able to save money because you're not carrying such heavy inventory. And these are all things that I can help with. There's a couple of key ratios that we're going to be able to look at. First one is your turnover rate. We will look at your financial statements, and we're going to take your cost of goods sold, and we're going to divide it by average inventory. And that's going to tell you your turnover rate, and you should be between 2 and 4. A higher number tends to mean your revenues are higher. But with a higher turnover rate, you might be losing economies of scale and see your costs go up for your inventory management. So while you see revenue increase, we see profitability either be stagnant or we can see that drop if we're not efficiently managing our inventory. And entrepreneurs, we survive on profitability, not on revenue. And then finally, your quick ratio. Your quick ratio is your quick assets, that is cash, accounts receivable, divided by your current liabilities. And it's a very quick test to see if you've got the cash available to meet all current debts or outstanding liabilities. And starting with just those two, we can get a pretty good sense of where your business is and some of the things that we can continue to look at to see where we can make improvements and either help you grow, remain resilient, or get into different markets or different product lines. I'm going to drop this link into chat because I know it's a PowerPoint and it's not clickable. So this affords you the opportunity to sign up for some of that no cost advising that's offered. But while we have time today, and since you're here with us, what questions do you have that I can answer for you?
All right, all right. Let me get to the first question that was posted. It asks, what if as a startup, we can't afford to pay the upfront costs to buy everything in bulk?
Okay, so there's a couple different things that we can do here. You can go with vendor financing. That is, you get the vendor to cover the cost or finance directly through them so that you can get their product into your store. Now, they're going to charge interest for that because when their business model is not to, lend you inventory or lend you product, they want to sell what they're creating. So they're taking the risk of not receiving that cash payment up front. So time value of money says if they're going to take that payment over time, they're allowed to charge a little bit of interest. But if that's the only way that you can get the inventory into your store to get started, that might be the way to go. We have to look at what you feel the turnover rate is going to be. How quickly can you sell out? You don't want to just buy in bulk to get the lowest per unit cost if it's going to take you so long to make those sales that any profitability is eaten up in your carrying costs and your cost of borrowing, which is interest. So great question. Does that answer things? I'm not sure. Oh, Christina, you're muted.
Oh, sorry.
I'm not sure if each of the attendees have the opportunity to speak or if they only have the opportunity to use the chat function.
I think they might be able to raise their hand, so they could potentially ask either way, I believe. So if you do have a question you'd like to speak, try raising your hand and I will work on getting you to be able to ask your question live. If you're not comfortable with that and you'd rather write it, you can do that as well. All right, I've got another question. Are you ready for more questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So this next one asks, can you walk through the ratios you just mentioned again?
Absolutely. So your turnover ratio, you will take your cost of goods sold. So whatever it costs to actually create what it is that your retail product is, your cost of goods sold divided by, in dollars, the value of your average inventory. And you can do this for the quarter, you can do it for the year. Cost of goods sold divided by average inventory. And if you're using inventory tracking software, you're going to be able to keep track of that. If you're using a clipboard and you check your inventory every single Friday, you just take over the course of 13 weeks for the quarter, the average value of that inventory divided into the quarter's cost of goods sold, and that will give you some number. And we want it to be, the retail sweet spot is between 2 and 4. More than 4, again, tends to mean that you're driving revenues, but you might be losing efficiency, so you might see profitability dip. But those are things that we can look at together. The other one was the quick ratio. The quick ratio is your quick or your liquid assets, accounts receivable, cash on hand, marketable securities are included, but we don't often see those, divided by current liabilities. Notice that inventory is not included in that because they consider inventory as not being able to be converted to cash quickly enough. So if you've got a bill coming due and you've got tons of inventory, but no cash, that's going to be a problem for your business. Another reason to more efficiently manage your inventory and not have so much in inventory that you have dried up the business bank account, allowing you to or not allowing you to make good on your current liabilities. So those are the two that we covered.
All right, all right. And we have another question here. It asks, or it states, I own a retail shop and we order inventory months ahead of when we sell it. What are some resources you recommend for general economic information so I can do a better job anticipating demand for the year ahead?
Okay, so I know a couple retailers like this where they do all their Christmas buying back in the spring. So I can totally relate to this. Your public library is a great first stop. Your public library has got a resource librarian who right now is bored to tears because not enough business owners come in to use the resources that they have specific to small business. Database on top of database of information that you can use from the US Census Bureau, exporting and importing numbers. All of that is available, and most of it available online. You just go in once, they'll show you how to use it, and then you go home and you use your library card number and you log in, you do everything from home. Second to that would be us here. I will happily walk you through some different things and resources that we have at the WSBDC. And then finally, check out the SBA website, sba.gov. They've got some resources there as well. Excellent question.
All right, we have another one here that I think you touched on before. It says, is there some sort of calculation that is recommended to determine how much inventory you should carry based on your monthly or annual sales?
I wish there was. As I was beginning to fine tune this, get past mayonnaise and really dig deep and get some content developed for everybody, I thought I might be able to develop an algorithm or an equation, have it published in the Wall Street Journal, get famous. Christina, don't worry, I'll be at One Redmond even after I'm published and famous. But there's not, because it's so dynamic, and industries and businesses are so incredibly different. An auto parts store is going to manage inventory very differently than a restaurant, who will manage inventory very differently from a salon. It's like baking. My daughter's a freshman at Central studying to be a teacher, and she's an avid baker. And she will tell you that when you change, since everything is based on ratios, when you change the amount of one ingredient, that affects everything else. So if we were to go back through the slides and we look at all those bullet points, things like capacity, cost effectiveness, scarcity, when one variable changes, it spider webs out and affects the other variables. So it's so dynamic, businesses, that having a static equation to say, these are the exact inventory levels you should have, that doesn't exist. However, the caveat is, we can still help you with your inventory control. And we may not be on that efficient frontier where you're 100% perfect, but we're going to get you somewhere where you can be more sustainably profitable. And that's what we will happily help you do.
All right. Well, our next question is actually drilling down to a specific industry here. And this might be something you might need to take on, one-on-one later, but let me go ahead and ask it. It states, I own a greeting card business. What is the best way to track inventory?
So many questions. What's your, how many greeting cards do you sell? How many different types of greeting cards and paper and inks and other things do you work with? How unique is your product? Do you use any sort of special printing method? Do you have the greeting cards that have the little things that you super glue or rubber cement on the front or on the inside? What goes into the greeting card creation process, and what different things must you keep in your inventory? A very awesome question, but so rooted in the complexity of how dynamic business is that I won't be able to answer that here. Yep. However, that is something I will happily work with you one-on-one. And congrats, that sounds like an awesome business, by the way.
I love it. I love it. And yes, I think you're right. I think, getting that one-on-one time with you, I think would be very valuable to a lot of business, because every business is so different in every industry. So, all right, our next question. Again, an industry specific question, I think. I run a restaurant and we're caught between not being able to anticipate if we'll be able to get the product we need. So we're considering ordering more just to stock up. The other point is that right now it's hard to predict demand because people are still concerned about dining in. We can either order more and gamble on demand being there or not and risk not being able to meet demand. Are you encountering any issues like this, and what do you advise?
Okay, yes. And here's the good news. The good news is with the in this COVID era, most businesses are being affected the same way. So this is not a specific to you business, and that's a good thing. It means your competition is being affected by the exact same thing. So how assertive or how aggressive do you want to be in this? What I mean by that is, do you want to go for broke and be like, hey, we want to grow during this. We don't want to just survive, but we want to grow from this. We want to expand. We strike while the iron's hot. There are some things that we can do to potentially forecast and put you in a position to grow. Or do you want to be a little bit more, let's wait and see, we've got a good thing going, we don't need to rock the boat too bad, we just want to make sure that we're being flexible and nimble so that when things do turn, we're there to turn right along with it. So these are all questions that must be asked of each business owner to decide what your strategic what your strategy is going to be for the next quarter, for the next year. Because, and we talked about this yesterday. I met with Renton's downtown partnership, and we talked about this very thing. And the question was asked, well, if it's, basically, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? And I politely challenged that, because competition creates the need to continue to innovate. Restaurants 2 years ago, so much of the survivability was based on who had a drive-through window and who didn't, who already offered some sort of delivery or pickup service and who didn't, who was able to quickly adapt and who didn't. And in all honesty, that was such a driving force in businesses that made it and didn't, fair or unfair, but that flexibility largely determined who stayed in business and who didn't. And if you're the ones that stayed in business, I salute you for being resolute. Let's continue to capitalize on that. We don't want to just see you survive. We want to see you thrive. So again, specific to your industry, I can't get into the weeds on that here, but let's work one-on-one. And there are some resources that I can get you pointed toward and some questions that we can dig deep on and get you to where you want to be.
Yep. And a reminder, I know you're seeing it right in front of you, but these business advising sessions are at no cost to our small businesses. So definitely take advantage of that. All right, next question. All right, we says, I work in food service or catering, and I'm looking at combining inventory orders with a few other companies to drive down costs. Curious if cooperative agreements like this work in other industries.
It can. In fact, this is actually a common practice that falls under this bootstrapping umbrella, which is basically a way to, it may not be the ideal way, because when you're in a cooperative agreement, you got to rely on some other businesses to hold up, their end of the bargain. So when you're doing some sort of bootstrapping technique, there's usually some sort of concession that is being made in flexibility, in choice, in frequency of delivery, in exactly what you want. In every major city, there's some sort of company, and their whole business model is to liquidate the assets of other companies. And we see it in restaurants. Seattle's probably got more than one. You can go and buy industrial ranges and ventilation hoods and walk-in refrigerators and bar stools and glasses and everything else. And if you want to open up your restaurant and you're like, hey, I've really got my heart set on these blue vinyl bar stools, but you go to a restaurant liquidator and you get red vinyl bar stools, but they're half off, that is a form of bootstrapping. And so much like your cooperative agreement, yes, it absolutely exists in all sorts of different industries. But please understand that with anything like that, while it can drive costs down, it also tends to affect things like flexibility and choice. So if you've already decided, hey, we got to get costs down because we got to make it through this little short-term hiccup here, great. we can proceed forward with that. If you haven't weighed that yet, let's talk and decide how much are we giving up and how much cost savings are we actually realizing? And does that favor me or does it not favor me? And what's best for our business moving forward? Great question.
All right. We've got a next question here. It says, I'm planning on opening a second location of my retail store. Is there anything I need to know about successfully tracking inventory between two stores?
Okay, so now we are getting past a single location and really having eyes on our inventory all the time. And my question back to this business owner would be, are you going to manage two different inventories at two different locations, or are you going to centralize your inventory either offsite or at one of the locations?
Okay, sorry about that. I had a little technical difficulty. Okay, so here's another question that just came through. It says, if we're launching a new product, should we just guess at how much we're going to sell and buy that much inventory?
Christina, would you repeat that, please?
Oh, it says, if we're launching a new product, should we just guess at how much we are going to sell and buy that much inventory? So what do you do with inventory when you're launching new products and trying to predict how much you should buy? I think that's the question.
Goodness. Okay, let's not just take a wild guess at this. There's information out there that can help us get close to what and here's the thing when it comes to forecasts and projections. If you tell me in month 36 our revenue is going to be this, I guarantee you the one spot you're never going to land on is the one thing you wrote down. So it's not about landing on a spot, but it's about shooting for some sort of range. We think we're going to be between here and here. And if we're above that, great, we're killing it. If we're inside that operating range, that's what we predicted, things are going smoothly. If we're below that, we got some things to do because we're not hitting the minimum that we thought we would. So don't aim for a point, but aim for a range. Now, specifically, and back to your question, there's a lot of information out there that can help you get close to what that range might be. And a lot of that may not even be stuff that's published already, which is what we call secondary market research. Someone else did it, they published it, you just have to go look it up. That's what the library is going to be able to afford you. But something a little bit closer to primary market research, and that's doing some studies of your customer segment, doing some soft product launches, doing some, I just completely lost my vocabulary, some product giveaways, some prototypes, that's what I was looking for. I love trade shows when we're launching new things because a trade show allows you to get in front of both your competition and your customer segment at the exact same time. So let's look at how we can get close to what we think we're going to need for inventory rather than just take a wild guess. If you take a wild guess and you're right, fantastic, but that's not replicable. And then you take the next wild guess and we're not right and we're like, shoot, it didn't work this time. So let's at least understand why we're making the decision that we are. And if we're not correct, at least we knew what went into it so that when we make the next decision, we can make that adjustment and try and continue to get closer. It's knowing the why behind the what that helps propel our business forward and not just taking wild stabs in the dark. Again, another great question.
All right. And a reminder to anybody, if you do want to ask a question live, go ahead and raise your hand. In the meantime, I'll go to the ones that I have feeding to me. All right. This next question, Sean asks, what are some strategies for reducing storage costs?
Well, that depends on, is your storage space inside your retail space or is it standalone? Do you have a retail store and then some separate warehouse or storage facility that's a half mile or a mile or a city away? How long is your lease? When do you have the opportunity to actually change something? What are your needs and how flexible must you be able to be in the future? So again, let's come back to the baking analogy. Every variable that's changed is going to wind up affecting other variables? That's a really tough question to ask, and I apologize. I can't get any further than that. But let's build on that, and there are some things that I can help with, I'm sure. And Christine, before you ask the next one, I don't think I got far enough into the business owner who'd asked about expanding to a second location. If that business owner has replied either in chat or some other way, I'm hoping I can give a little bit more advice if I know how they're going to manage the inventory between two different locations. So if there's a way we can try and track that down, I'll try and get a little bit more detail for them here while we're on the webinar.
All right, all right. And I will look through the messaging to see if we get some any detail on that. All right, so while I look for that, I'll ask you the next question. So it asks, what is the best way of getting rid of old inventory? Should we donate it? I don't want to run a sale and then have people expect those low prices again later.
Right. Okay. So excellent. You're thinking into the future, and you're asking yourself some really good and some really tough questions. It depends upon what type of business it is. It's different when you're trying to liquidate things with an expiration date like food products versus trying to liquidate Christmas trees on December 24th versus trying to liquidate Valentine's Day candy on February 15th. So this really depends upon what it is that you're liquidating. And you raise a great point in now setting a precedent for just having a sale, and now your customers expecting, hey, when's that sale coming around again? Because I'll just wait. So there's a lot of elasticity of demand that plays a part in this, because now the perception of your customer segment comes into play. Those are questions that we can get further into.
All right, and this next question is more of a statement. It's from Jonathan Baker. It says, the best piece of advice I got last year was if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And that's been super helpful to understand why this is all important. It took us about 6 months to get the systems in place, but now we can actually see trends and successes and failures. Thanks for the advice. So there you go. And I've got a reply to the other location. So each location had their own inventory and there was no central storage location.
Okay. So, and I know we can't do a huge back and forth, but now one of the next things I would ask is, how far away are these two locations from each other? If we're looking at Bellevue and Redmond, that's entirely different than managing two inventories between Seattle and Boise. So let's assume that these two locations are close. I would systematize how you move inventory back and forth. That is, have a set day, a set route, a set schedule where you've got one employee and they're wrapping other things into this trip that goes between the two different locations. And hey, we need extra inventory of A, B, and C, and I'm going to pick up some X, Y, and Z while I'm there, and then bring it back. Keep it standardized, keep it systematized, because the one thing you don't want to do is, oh shoot, location number 2 needs some of this. Quick, let's run it over before lunch. Keep things on a schedule, and that will help you control that cost part, which is one of the bigger ones in your inventory management.
All right, we have a couple of questions just popped up, and we'll go back to the greeting card question that you had. It says, back to the greeting card business. I have a greeting card sales rep. He is insisting that I have UPC barcodes on all my printed cards. Getting GS1 would cost me at least $750 to add these. However, I am taking classes with a big greeting card group of people called Proof to Product. They say most card companies do not put UPC on their cards, and if they do, they said the store that is requesting them should supply the UPCs. Should I not work with the sales rep, or how do I get to the store to supply these? It's a very specific question, but there you go.
That is extremely specific. All right. So again, there are usually more variables that are in play than we uncover initially. My initial reaction is, any person who is trying to get you to do something that is outside of norms, outside of standard practices, probably not someone that you are going to continue to work with. Not because this person is malicious or anything else, but for a simple business decision of the shortest distance being between 2 points is a straight line. Why would we incur this extra cost, this extra effort when there's another way of doing things? Now, the caveat, the asterisk to that might be, can working with this rep's company do more for my business? I don't know the answer to that question. And then Christina, would you repeat the second half of that about working with stores? I missed that part.
Oh, yes, yes. Sorry, I put it in the answer. So the second part saying that they say most card companies do not put UPCs on their cards. And if they do, they said the store that is requesting them should supply those UPCs. Should I not work with the sales rep, or how do I get the store to supply these UPCs?
Okay, so specific to how you get the store to supply them, I don't know. That's just a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. But if that's an industry standard, that should not be a super tough challenge. And we've got some advisors who specialize in retail, and I bet you we can find that answer if that's something specific that we're looking for.
Great, great. So again, reach out to Sean. I think there's a lot that he and the team at BDC can help. All right, this next question asks, what are some important things to track when counting inventory? For example, I'm opening a cafe that sells coffee and sandwiches. So do I need to track every single ingredient for both products?
You need to track the things well, you need to track everything to make sure that you're receiving what you ordered, receiving what you paid for, to keep track of shrink, to keep track of spoilage. But the main thing is to keep track of the things that are most pertinent to your deliverables and the things that are more challenging to replace on a short fuse. So if you're dealing with sandwiches, bread is not going to keep for a long time. If you're specializing in tuna sandwiches, that tuna is going to be a heck of a lot easier to track because you can just store it and kind of forget about it. And you can buy as much as you want, as much as you can afford, and it's got a long shelf life. But those things that are going to turn over more frequently are the things that you're going to have to track more specifically. The little one-off ingredients, someone says, hey, put a little basil on my sandwich or whatever it is, or this special mustard that you have in the back, but you only have one. It's like Worcestershire sauce. Stop laughing at me.
I do the
Right?
same thing, so I'm just why I'm laughing.
Lived long enough to buy a second bottle of that, right? So for things like that, you're not paying as much attention to those specialty things that last forever and you don't use very often, as opposed to the things that you're going to turn over, like the luncheon meat and the cheese and the bread. Also keep in mind the non-consumable things like cups and lids and plates and liners and all those other things. So the things you use the most of and most pertinent to your deliverables.
All right, that was good. That was good. We have a few minutes left. A reminder, go ahead and raise your hand or type your question in the Q&A box. And since we don't have any open questions right now, I just, any last, because we are coming up to the end of the program, any last minute advice or parting thoughts you'd like to give to the group?
I would say there's always room for improvement, and like the quote you read from, was it John Baker? Am I remembering the person? Okay, absolutely correct. We can't improve what we don't track, and I will share from personal experience that when I first had my first business, I was a financial advisor and spent the better part of 17 years doing that. I didn't track those things, and I just said to myself, if I'm doing the right thing and I'm doing a lot of it, things are going to work out. And it didn't take long. Actually, it did take long because I was stubborn about it. But I realized that the less I was paying attention and the more I was losing track of all those ratios and numbers and thresholds and parameters, all those things I wasn't paying attention to was costing me, because I wasn't able to drive decisions based on analytics and metrics and real numbers. It was, I think this is right. And it was one of the biggest mistakes I've made as an entrepreneur is not knowing the hard and fast numbers to my business. So we start with your financials. We start with your balance sheet. We start with your income statement. And understanding that will give you a great bird's eye view on what you're doing great and then some of the areas for improvement. So really understanding the numbers for your industry, what your competition is doing and how you rank and how you grade out against your competition. And then just the overall health of your business. Know and understand those numbers.
All right, we have another question that came through. It asks, do you recommend any particular inventory management software? We have exceeded the capacity of our accounting software to properly track and report on our inventory.
I don't. That is a question I would be able to put out to the network of WSBDC advisors and ask those who work a little bit more closely, more often, to see if their clients recommend anything. But what a great problem to have. You have outgrown your old software. Bravo.
Excellent. Well, I don't see any more questions. And Sean, great job at answering such a variety of topics here. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the program. So this concludes our program for the day. Thank you again, Sean, for giving us your time and expertise. We all appreciate you very much. I want to say thank you again to all our partners here on the East Side who are working hard to support their business community. I want to make sure you bookmark this site, www.oneeastside.org/spark. There you will find key resources, information on our no-cost one-on-one advising, our weekly webinars, and grant opportunities as they become available. And a big thank you for all participating in our webinar today. So until we see you again, this concludes our program. Thank you.